So in this video, I'm going to teach you how to teach your dog to sit. We're using positive reinforcement. I'm going to first show you how to teach your dog to sit, what you shouldn't be doing, what a lot of guardians make mistakes on when they're teaching sit. Then I'm going to cover some frequently asked questions. And finally, we will wrap up with some common troubleshooting obstacles that guardians face when they're teaching the dog sit. Here we have Crush, who is learning sit for the very first time, and you will notice that she is actually practicing it doing a capturing method. So what this means is we're actually just standing around waiting for Crush to offer the sit, which I realize sounds counterintuitive. I get it, but I promise there's a method to the madness. So hang tight. I'm going to show you how we get your dog to volunteer the sit and reinforce it over time. And I will also show you why we do it this way. Now, a lot of times when guardians are teaching sit using positive reinforcement, they do a method called luring, where they put the treat up to the dog's nose and kind of guide it backwards into that sit. And I know that positive reinforcement gets kind of a bad rep, and this method of luring is one of the reasons why we get a bad reputation, is because we're compelling the dog into that sit position by basically forcing the treat into their nose. There's a lot of reasons you don't want to do this. The first is that it can get the dogs very reliant on the treat in order to perform the sit, and that just makes it harder, unnecessarily difficult, to fade out the treat later on. Is you're just basically adding in an extra step of having to remove the treat from the equation later on, and it's unnecessary work. The other problem that it can be is that it basically is getting the dogs to focus more on the treat than it is about the behavior that we're trying them to learn, which slows down the learning skill. It's not that they can't learn sit this way. Of course they can, otherwise it wouldn't be a recommended strategy. But it's slowing down the learning curve because they're focusing so much on the treat and not enough on the behavior of, okay, bend back legs, put butt to floor. Instead, what you want to do to teach your dog sit is you want to do a method called capturing, and the terminology and the fancy names of it don't really matter. You don't need to study that, but effectively what you're doing is you're waiting for your dog to offer the behavior, and then you're going to capture that behavior with a treat. So you want to set your dog up in a limited, distracted environment. So usually this means you're practicing inside the house. Perhaps you are in your backyard, but with fewer distractions going around outside. And all I want you to do is just set yourself up where your hands are neatly at your sides or at a very relaxed position, and wait for your dog to offer the sit.
Yes.
Good timing with Crush, I saw that. As soon as they do, I want you to yes if you're using a marker. And if you don't know what a marker is, it's just a way to identify a specific behavior that is going to earn your dog the treat. So you'll say yes to acknowledge that that was the behavior that you're looking for, and then you will bring out the treat and toss away. This is an important part when it's time to feed. I want you to toss the treat off to the side so that your dog has to stand up out of that sit position and go get the treat. That is a way to reset them so that they're prepared to offer the sit again. Now, if you just feed to mouth, likely what will happen is your dog will just stay in the sit position and stare at you. This is beneficial if you want to teach stay later on, but if the objective is to get your dog to learn the behavior of sit rapidly, then you probably want to feed off to the side to get them to do the next repetition. Now, importantly, when you start teaching sit, I actually want you to do it without saying the cue. So that is that you're not going to say sit when your dog does the behavior just yet, not initially, okay? What you want to do is wait for your dog to understand that the behavior of putting butt to floor, bending legs, is what we're looking for. And once your dog starts saying, hey, I think this is what's getting me the treat, right? This is why you keep yesing and tossing the treat off to the side. Then you add in the component of, okay, now that you know the definition that we're looking for, let's give you the label for what it is that you're doing, and that is sit. So here we're gonna see Team Ellie practicing the sit, and you'll see that it starts off without the cue, and then mom will gradually incorporate the cue sit as Ellie progresses. Yes. Sit. Yes. Now, importantly, we are waiting for Ellie to come back on her own terms. That is that we are not calling her back over. We're waiting for her to be ready. And this is important because you don't want to rush her learning. It's better for her to tell you when she's ready. And then you can start to acknowledge that, hey, yes, that is the behavior we're looking for. It's best if the dogs can, It's best if the dogs can learn when they are in the right state and not distracted and thinking about other things. What I love about this video is Mom is really good about making sure that her hands are in a neutral zone and she doesn't reach for the treat until after she's marked. So then she tosses the treat. The treat is not part of the actual sit behavior. This makes it really easy later on when it's time to fade out the treat and you want to use some sort of other reinforcer, or you want to move on to the next behavior. You want to ask for, loose leash walking, or you want to ask for a stay or whatever. It makes it very easy to get rid of the treat later if the treat doesn't come out until after the mark has been stated. Now, once it's time to start to prompt your dog so that you're gonna say sit before they offer it, you basically want to start to time the sit right before you think they're about to do it. It's best to do it when you think that, the dog has been doing several repetitions and, all things being equal, assuming nothing drastic changes in the environment, probably your dog is going to do another repetition. That is the time to start to cue sit preemptively.
Sit. Good.
So,
Sit.
there you go. That was clear. So Jonathan, the repetition you just did before this one, you gave a visual and a verbal at the same time. Whenever you're training, I want you to just pick one at a time. Okay, so only train the verbal or only train the visual.
Sit.
That was really clear with Banana.
Now, a common mistake that some guardians make when they're teaching this is that when they cue sit, they're actually keeping the treat in their hand and they're moving it to their chest. So you can kind of see there's a couple of times that Mom is going to, whether intentionally or accidentally, move her hand up to her chest, and she thinks that she's keeping the treat away from Autumn so that Autumn doesn't jump for it. But what you're actually setting up is a visual cue. And if you want a visual cue, that's not inherently a problem, but you want to make sure that you know that that's what you're setting up. Because if the sit is happening because you have your hand up high, then later on when you don't have your hand up high anymore, your dog is probably not going to offer the sit. And you're going to be sitting there being like, I don't understand why my dog's not doing the sit anymore. Well, it's because you don't have your hand up by your chest anymore like you did when you were practicing. So just be conscious of where you're putting your hands. That's one of the reasons why I prefer to just have my hands in a neutral zone and not have any sort of visual cue unless I absolutely need it for a dog, say a deaf dog. Now, another common mistake that guardians will make is that they are not feeding to the mouth. And so what's going to end up happening in this case with Autumn is you'll see that she has to kind of ask for a touch over here to get Autumn to stand up. That could be resolved by just tossing the treat off to the side right here, as opposed to feeding to mouth. Right here, she's feeding to mouth, and that's just going to keep the dog in that sit position. So let's say you get into a situation where you ask for a sit and your dog gives you the incorrect behavior. What will end up happening is, we'll see with Autumn here, she's going to ask for sit, and then Autumn's going to actually go into a down position. And now you can see they kind of just have this weird stare off position. Like they just kind of stare at each other and no one really knows what to do. It's okay to have a small pause where, you're making it very clear to your dog, like, hey, that's not what I'm looking for. It's okay to have the pause, but too much of a pause and you'll start to get frustration signals. So you'll start to see Autumn kind of starts staring off. She's going to bounce her head a couple of times. It's just a very weird thing. What you would want to do is, as Mom did here, move to another spot in the house or move to another zone, or see if you can just be like, okay, we're all done. Let's go. Let's walk over here and, pretend like the training session is over, and maybe you're changing the room that you're training in. So you've actually elevated the criteria in that way, where now you're training in a new zone, which leads you to the next step in training sit, which is that you want to pick a more difficult spot to train in. So in this case, we have Crush, who's now training in the backyard. And I actually think in this particular case, there's her other dog, Team Crush's other dog is also in the backyard as well, which is adding a level of difficulty, adding a level of distraction, right? So you wouldn't want to just go from straight practicing inside the house to all of a sudden expecting your dog to practice with major distractions on a loose leash walk and you're in the middle of a park and there's frisbee going on and everything. You would want to start to think about your environments as a gradual progression of difficulty. So they practice in the backyard now. We're waiting for that offer of the sit. It's okay if it's a little bit of delay. There's nothing wrong with that. We're gonna let Crush think it through. Problem solving here. So one of the reasons why I like capturing is because it allows the dogs to think as opposed to just telling them what to do and giving them the answers right away. There's a level of problem solving. We're actually making the dogs smarter by doing it this way. She'll volunteer that sit and immediately capture and toss off to the side to reset. Perfect. And now we do it again. So you can see that as we change the environment, it may mean that you're no longer cueing. Whereas even if you were inside the house and you were able to cue, you may find that you're no longer able to cue because you're outside and you've changed the criteria of the environment. And that's okay. It just means that you need to build back up, and you probably will build faster simply because you laid the foundation inside the house to begin with. I love Mom's posture here where she has her hands in a very neutral zone. The only thing I would probably suggest is maybe not staring at Crush as intently. That stare off can sometimes make certain dogs uncomfortable. It doesn't seem to be making Crush uncomfortable, but it can make certain other dogs uncomfortable. So now it's time to practice the sit out practically. I really love practicing sit out in an open field. In this case, we have Yeffy from France who is going to practice sit coming up to the guardian.
Ouais. Ayo. C'est bien ma puce, c'est bien mon bébé.
And in this case, now it actually might be time to practice feeding straight to mouth, and because that would make more sense. You're probably not going to ask for another sit right away. You're gonna start to incorporate it practically. So you're gonna start to drop it into situations where you're already practicing enrichment. Maybe you're already doing a recall, or you're already playing fetch, or you're already going on a sniffari and letting your dog sniff a bush, whatever it may be. You're gonna start to drop that behavior in practically. A lot of times people ask me, one of the common questions people ask me is what type of treats that I should be using. You want to be feeding comparably to however hard the dog is working. Generally speaking, when you start off teaching sit, especially outside in the inside in the house, you're probably going to be using low value treats. You can get away with, using some middle of the line treats. As you start progressing though, where you're practicing maybe out in the backyard with your other dog barking or your other dog playing around, there's some more stimuli, you're starting to incorporate sit more practically, probably at that point, you're gonna be using higher value treats actually. And I know that that doesn't make sense because you're thinking, well, they've been using sit they've been doing sit for a longer time. Shouldn't I be decreasing the value? But actually, you get into this middle stage where the dog is actually practicing the same behavior they've been doing, but in a harder environment and with more stimuli, which means you actually owe the dog a higher value treat because you want to pay comparably to however hard the dog is working. Now, yes, you're right. Eventually, you don't need to be feeding high value treats for sit into perpetuity. But usually what ends up happening is that we're going to start to chain, we call it chaining, other behaviors into the sit, where as soon as you ask for a sit practically out in the world, maybe you're going to follow that up with a stay, or you're going to follow that up with a touch, or you're going to follow that up with something else. And so when you start to chain in other cues or other behaviors to follow up that sit, then it still makes sense to pay a higher value treat, right? As you change the environment and you change the expectations of the sit, maybe it's not so much that you're decreasing the value of the treats, so much as you're increasing the expectations in order to get that treat. So you're still paying comparably. Now, if you enjoyed this video, do me a huge favor and hit like, consider subscribing for more positive reinforcement, science-backed dog training. If you are interested, you can check the description box below for a lot of free resources, including a free basic skills mini course course. You can check that out in the description box, and I will see you guys in the next video.